Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today, I'm really excited to welcome Republican Congressman Austin Scott from Georgia's 8th Congressional District. Congressman, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Hey, Brendan, thank you.
So there's a lot going on this week in D.C., as there is most weeks, that I want to cover. So let's start first with the NDAA. That's something that is currently being considered. I think it's going to be brought to the floor sometime this week or next week. I know that you actually have a couple of amendments that you have proposed to the NDAA. Can you tell us a little bit about those amendments and where we stand with them?
Yeah, they're debating it on the floor right now, the NDAA, and so hopefully we'll finish it this week. But I'll tell you, one of them, Brendan, is that the Defense Department will not be allowed to buy, the battery technology from China. And I was a little taken back that, about 14 days after we shot down the spy balloon that China sent across the United States, that Ford Motor Company announced a multi-billion-dollar deal with, but CATL. But we should not be using our DoD dollars to buy Chinese battery technology to use on our military installations inside the United States. And so that's one of the amendments that I had. It was originally put into the legislation that was targeted towards one specific company, and we're making a small change to it that will actually expand the types of battery technology that we will not be purchasing. But again, we don't want to be using DoD funds to support our primary adversary, which is China. And when you're buying stuff that is licensed through their technology, that's exactly what you're doing. So that's one of them. I had hoped to get an amendment in dealing with pharmacy benefit managers. It got ruled out of order because they believe it would actually cost money. We're very sensitive to the total spending right now. But one of the big issues with regard to pharmaceuticals in this country is there are 3 pharmacy benefit managers that control roughly 90% of the pharmaceutical supply in this country. And for those of you who don't know what a PBM is, it's a pharmacy benefit manager. They originally started out as part of the drug companies. Federal Trade Commission made the drug companies get rid of them because they said that's a conflict of interest. Well, now they're owned by the insurance companies, and that's even worse of a conflict of interest when you get right down to it. So we were trying to bust up that monopoly. That unfortunately did not get included in it. But it's a big bill. There's $886 billion in it. One of the things we're trying to do is to give the National Guard a seat on the Joint Chiefs and elevate them. Obviously, we depend on our Guard as well as our reserves today, just as we do our traditional military. So we're doing things trying to elevate them as well. So a lot of good things in the NDAA, passed out of committee with only one dissenting vote. I think you'll see it pass the floor, if not this week, early next week, and then move on to the Senate. And this is the one piece of legislation that Congress has gotten done, every year of the last 50 years, and not many pieces have we been able to do that with.
And your amendment that relates to not allowing us to buy those products from China, the batteries, I think most Americans would look at that and say, well, yeah, that just makes sense. It's common sense. But if it were to pass and we're no longer able to purchase them from China, do we have the infrastructure in place to either manufacture those here at home or buy them somewhere else?
So this is the problem. China dominates that market. And so my frustration with the Biden administration as a Republican is, if you're going to force us down the path of battery operated vehicles, then the first thing we should do is develop our own technology. We can do that through we've got great institutions in the United States. As a Georgia Bulldog, it pains me to say Georgia Tech, but I feel sure that through our institutions in the United States and our private sector, we can develop our own battery technology where we're not dependent on China. Where we're going to fall short is the ability to have the raw materials to build the batteries. And even if you have the raw material, from the standpoint of the minerals, the ability to process those minerals into the actual components of the battery is something that China absolutely dominates in. And so it would have made much more sense for us as a country to go the path of hybrids than battery with regard to that technology. So I'm frustrated on both sides, but I sure don't want our DoD funds going to support Chinese battery technology, which unfortunately it could go to do now.
I also know that there's a little back and forth going on right now between the Speaker and some of the House Freedom Caucus members as it relates to some of their amendments put forth in the bill, DOD policy relating to abortion and things like DE&I. Do you think the NDAA is the appropriate spot to have this debate, or is this sort of a conversation for another day?
So the base bill prohibits a lot of the things that the DoD has been allowing on the installations. So stuff like drag queen, story hour on military bases, and all that stuff, we have taken out in the base text of the NDAA as it is coming to the floor. So capping the amount of money that someone who is a DEI person can make inside the Department of Defense, that is in the base text of the legislation right now. So these cannot be undersecretaries of Defense for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have done a lot of the things in the base text to get rid of the DEI movement that you've seen inside the Department of Defense. Now, the people on the left will tell you this isn't the appropriate place for these discussions. Well, it is the DoD that has made them part of this discussion. When the DoD changed its policy on abortion, that is what led to the desire to put amendments about abortion in this piece of legislation. So if the DoD had not changed their position, then we would not be having this discussion right now. So I do think that if the DoD is going to play politics, which is unfortunate, they should not have changed their position on any of these things, then they should expect that amendments are going to be brought to stop them from doing that. DoD has been one of the most respected institutions in the world because they haven't played politics up to until recently. And now they, seem to want to engage in the DEI and the abortion and the transgender debate and participate in that. And if they're going to move down those paths, then you're going to see resistance from members of Congress towards the DoD pushing that direction.
I read recently, too, that the military is not reading its recruitment goals either. And I'm wondering if you could help shed some light on this as a member of the armed services. What do you think is responsible for that? Is it the fact that, Americans compared to other economically developed countries are unhealthy, even at a younger generation? Is it that people are turned off by the politicization of the military? What do you think is contributing to us not being able to meet those targets?
So I want to speak to the health issue for a second, even though I don't think that is what is causing us to not meet the targets. But we do have a serious problem in this country with obesity. And we have a significant portion of our population that when they come out of high school is not eligible to join the military either because of health or education reasons. So that is pushing our number of people that's eligible to join the military to historic lows as far as our high school graduates are concerned. But I think that what you're seeing here is more of the politicization of the DoD and the DEI press inside the DoD, where a lot of people are no longer comfortable with the positions they see the DoD taking. Now, I think I don't know what the right word for it is. I think it's been exaggerated a little bit, but it needs to be stopped, is the bottom line. The DoD should not be playing politics. The DoD needs to build a force that can protect this country.
I also know that you serve on the House Agriculture Committee, so I want to spend a little time talking about the Farm Bill, which I know you guys are busy at work on. First off, can you tell our listeners what's the importance of this Farm Bill?
Yeah. So when we talk about the U.S. food supply, we take for granted that we can walk into a grocery store and there's going to be food on the shelf. That is something that doesn't happen in every country out there. We are blessed to have an abundance of food that is domestically grown inside this country. That doesn't mean that we don't import some of our groceries, but we don't ever want to become dependent on a foreign source for food any more candidly than we should be dependent on foreign sources for oil or any other type of energy, including battery technology. So we have in this country passed what we call the Farm Bill every 5 years, and it updates current ag policy. So what we spend on domestic ag production is about 1/4 of 1% of what we spend in any given annual year. So you think about that 1/4 of 1% of total domestic spending is what we spend on agriculture. Now you're going to hear some groups on the right say, oh, well, because of the debt, we don't need to spend this. Because of the deficit, we don't need to spend this. Just understand this. It's 1/4 of 1% of total federal spending. That 1/4 of 1% provides crop insurance. It provides price loss coverage for our farmers. It provides the safety net that our farmers need in the event of a commodity price collapse or in the event of a natural disaster. It is what allows farmers to stay in business in the bad years so that they can make it through the good years. And I'll tell you, a farmer doesn't have a good year every single year. They're going to have a price collapse, or they're going to have a weather event. They're going to have something that's going to happen to them probably in 2 out of every 5 years. And so how do they cash flow through those bad years? Well, it's that 1/4 of 1% of total federal spending that provides that support that the ag community needs to make it from the bad year to the good year. It doesn't guarantee anybody a profit. It just allows you in those years of natural disasters and price losses to mitigate your total capital loss. It's important from the standpoint of financing for agriculture, because if you go to the bank to borrow the money to plant the crop, and most of our crops, we do go to the bank and borrow the money to plant the crop, you're going to have to prove to that banker that you can repay it. And the number one thing they want is some type of crop insurance. So with the Farm Bill, that is one aspect of it, is making sure that we handle the risk mitigation for our farmers. Again, that costs us about 1/4 of 1% of total federal spending, about 12, and that's about 12% of the total Farm Bill. 80% of the Farm Bill actually goes to what we call SNAP, or Supplemental Nutritional Assistance. And that is the part where there's been a tremendous debate over it. I personally believe that if you're going to receive SNAP benefits, if you're an able-bodied working age adult, you should have to work. I don't think you should have the choice of staying at home and receiving SNAP benefits if you can work. You should go to work. And so we raised the age from 49 to 54 in the debt limit agreement. So it moved it again 5 years, 49 to 54. I personally would have moved it a lot further, but you'll hear some on the left saying, well, we're making senior citizens go back to work. That's simply not true. The age move was 49 to 54. I would have personally moved it to 59 or somewhere in that range, but we're not making senior citizens go back to work. But if you're an able-bodied working age adult and you can work, you should work. So that's one of the key aspects that we've been debating that was handled in the debt limit. So it probably should not be and will not be a discussion in the Farm Bill with regard to SNAP. But SNAP is actually 81.1% of total Farm Bill spending now. You've then got CRP and other conservation programs in the bill that, we go from 12% to 81%. Those two combined take up 93%. You got conservation, administration, horticultural research, a few other things that eat up 1%, 2% here, there, and the other. But commodity support is extremely important to everybody in this country, because we need our food supply to be coming from family-based farms. We don't need supersized corporate farms in this country.
I wanted to ask too, because we've seen recently stories about China buying up farmland in the U.S., particularly near some U.S. military installations. Does the Farm Bill address that at all, or is that another committee?
Yeah, so I've had this discussion with my state legislators back home. Remember this, the property that you buy is titled at the state level. And it is in the titling of that property that is probably where it is best handled. So what's right for a California title might be very different from what's right for a Georgia title. I really think this is an issue where we need every state out there to address the issue on the titling of property. It is the Chinese are our adversary. They don't share our interests. They do not share our values. They are buying land next to military installations. They are buying ag land. They are doing a lot of things inside our country that is not in the best interest of the American citizens, and we need to be doing anything and everything we can to stop it. I want you to know something else they've done. They've been very smart in how they've accumulated the ag technology. So if you look at what they're doing with ChemChina, if you look at what they're doing with Syngenta Seed Company, China actually has a significant amount of control over the inputs into our domestic food supply. So I might grow the watermelons or the vegetables or whatever the crop might be. I might grow them inside the United States, but if they control the seed supply, I can only grow the crop that I have the seed for. And we have not been very smart, excuse me, about allowing them to accumulate all of the technology in our seed supply and in the chemical supply, the inputs that it takes to grow our crops.
It's really fascinating to me, Congressman, because I think most American people know that we are overly dependent on China. But hearing something like you just said about the seeds, I wasn't aware of something like that. So it's so fascinating when I talk to members of Congress, because it helps me and I think my listeners realize the things that we never even would have associated coming from China, that they actually have dominance over, that could cause serious ramifications here at home.
They have been very smart about how they've accumulated these things. I don't blame them for being smart. I blame us for being naive and not stopping them before now. And so we've got to do a better job of that. Most of this seed technology was developed in our land grant institutions. So our taxpayers have invested in the seed, and somehow they've ended up where the companies are owned by China. And that's something that we need to unwind.
Today on Capitol Hill, there was a hearing in the Judiciary Committee with the FBI Director, Chris Wray. He's been tangled up in some controversy recently about his handling of the Hunter Biden situation. What's your overall confidence level in the FBI?
I have a very diminished level of confidence in the FBI at this stage. They used to be one of the most respected institutions in this country. Director Wray is very careful with the things that he says. I think that the problems in the FBI go back to before he was the director of the FBI. But I can just tell you that I'm very uncomfortable with a lot of the things that I see that the FBI has done in the past. This country, our democracy, depends on the people knowing the truth when they go to vote. So the public has to know the truth when they go to vote. When the Justice Department, whether it be the FBI, the ATF, or the big justice, become political entities and operate with extreme bias for or against one political party, that is a very dangerous thing for the American citizens in our democracy, regardless of if you're a Democrat or a Republican, a conservative or a liberal. We cannot have a Justice Department that is biased. And unfortunately, we've got one that when all the facts are looked at, you can't say that they have not been biased in the way they've treated conservatives versus liberals in the last several years.
And so what you're...
I think it started before Christopher Wray got there, though. Let me say that.
And so what you're referring to basically is what people perceive as the weaponization of the Justice Department. And we saw recently the relationship between big tech companies like Facebook and the Biden White House and the DOJ, where the courts actually had to step in and basically order them to sever that relationship, we'll call it. I think it's more collusion, but sever that relationship. What do you make of that? How harmful has that relationship been to our democracy and to people's faith in the justice system?
It skews, from the standpoint of our democracy, it skews the information that people get. And it skews the levels of credibility of what they get. And so I think it's absolutely been a problem. Look at Jeff Fortenberry and what the FBI did to Jeff Fortenberry. He was a member of Congress. He was from Nebraska, I believe, and they forced his trial to be out in California. I mean, now you've even got an extreme liberal justice saying, why was this man's trial in California? Why wasn't he tried in Nebraska where he represented, or Washington, D.C., where he served? I don't know a case of a Democrat that has been treated the same way that Congressman Fortenberry was. I'm not saying Congressman Fortenberry is innocent or that what he did is right. I'm just saying there's a double standard in the way the Justice Department applies things with regard to if someone is a conservative or a Republican versus the way they apply it to a Democrat or a liberal. If you look at the Biden family, they clearly have tremendous sums of wealth. They clearly have tremendous sums of wealth. Where did it come from? Well, I mean, if that had been a Republican, whether it be Trump or somebody else, I can assure you they would be investigating the sources of their funds. And they don't seem to be willing to investigate the sources of those funds. And so all I want is a single standard. No double standard is all we ask out of the Justice Department.
As I mentioned at the top of the show, you're from the great state of Georgia. And so we're going to be heading into a presidential election year. Going to be a lot of focus on Georgia. There was reporting last time about voting irregularities or how fair was the vote that took place in Georgia, et cetera. So 2 questions for you. Number 1, how confident are you in Georgia's election system? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but if you had to predict, where do you think Georgia is going to wind up landing in the 2024 cycle?
Yeah, so I feel very good about our current election system. If you look back to the last election cycle, we had somewhere around 1.3, 1.4 million absentee ballots cast. That is significantly more than we have ever had cast in the history of our elections in Georgia. We usually ran somewhere around 200,000. So we went from about 200,000 to somewhere in the 1.2, 1.3 million range. If I had known this question was coming, I would have pulled the actual numbers for you. Those ballots were cast this time without any signature verification or ID. Now, I have a problem with that. And our state legislature went back and they changed the law so that now you have to have an ID for absentee ballots in the state of Georgia. If you remember, if your listeners remember, this is what Joe Biden said was Jim Crow, and Major League Baseball pulled the game out of the state of Georgia, and then Coca-Cola and Delta and a bunch of other companies started complaining about the piece of legislation. Well, I would remind you that the piece of legislation that passed, we had record voter turnout after the piece of legislation was signed into law, and Brian Kemp was elected governor, and Raphael Warnock was elected U.S. Senator on the same ballot. So it seems to me like when we talk about the current Georgia election law, that there's integrity has been put back in the system. When you ask who I think will win, I think it depends on the candidate. And I think from the standpoint of the state of Georgia, again, if you look at the fact that we elected a Republican governor on the same ballot that the state of Georgia elected a Democratic senator, then it's going to depend on who the nominee is. 100%.
My last question for you.
And in the case of the presidency, it's going to depend on who the VP nominee is as well.
Absolutely. There's a lot that goes into that. My last question for you, though, is, you've been a member of Congress now since 2011. So you've been around the block. You've seen some things there in Congress. What do you think is the biggest misconception that the American people have about how Congress operates?
So I think there's probably the perception that if you vote with somebody 100% of the time, you're friends. And if you vote with somebody 0% of the time, you're not friends. That's actually not the case. Members of Congress are human beings. We like being around people that we trust, that we know are honest. And so some of my best friends up here are are members of the Progressive Caucus, and I vote with them 0% of the time. And some of the people that I don't hang out with at all, I probably vote with almost 100% of the time. But I mean, we all like someone who's genuine, right? You want to be around somebody who knows who they are, and who candidly you can trust not to, record a joke you might tell. And believe it or not, as a member of Congress, we like to tell jokes and laugh.
Well, Congressman, I know we're out of time for today, but I want to thank you very much for spending some of your afternoon with us. I really enjoyed the conversation and hope to have you back maybe sometime in the future.
Hey, thanks, Brandon.